The desert wind howled across the hills of Canaan as Joseph, 17 and wide-eyed with destiny, sprinted between the tents of his father's camp. He clutched a folded parchment, his latest dream, its meaning burning in his mind like fire. The sky above him shimmered with dawn, and for a moment he felt as though heaven itself leaned closer to listen. Joseph wasn't like the others. He wasn't the strongest like Judah, nor the fiercest like Simeon. But he carried something far more dangerous, visions. Visions where stars bowed, harvests rose and fell at his command, and futures unfolded before him like scrolls. And today he felt something shifting, something coming. His brothers watched him approach, their eyes narrowed with a mixture of irritation and fear. They had grown tired of his stories, tired of the glimmer in his eyes that hinted he was meant for more than tending sheep. But Joseph didn't slow. He stepped into the center of the camp, breathless, and said the words that would ignite a storm. I dreamed again, and this time all 11 stars bowed before me. A tense silence spread like thunder. Then came the anger, then the mocking, and yet, beneath it all, something else shimmered in the air, something none of them could name, but fate could. And it was already moving. As the brothers exchanged dark glances, Joseph felt a sudden chill, a whisper that the path ahead would not only lift him high, but first plunge him into darkness. The heat of midday hammered the land as Joseph walked alone through the valley of Hebron, searching for his brothers just as his father had asked. His steps were light, hopeful. Maybe today they would finally listen. Maybe today the tension would end. But miles away, perched on a rocky ridge, his brothers had already spotted him. That colorful robe, the mark of their father's love, made him visible even from afar. Reuben's jaw tightened. Simeon crossed his arms. Judah narrowed his eyes as the desert wind carried Joseph's silhouette closer. "Here comes the dreamer," one of them muttered, bitterness dripping from every word. Another replied, "Let's end his dreams once and for all." Their voices were low, but their intentions sharp. A plan was forming, dark, sudden, and irreversible. Joseph, unaware of the storm building ahead, waved when he saw them. He picked up his pace, smiling, excited to share another dream, perhaps even reconcile. But as he approached, something shifted. Their eyes didn't carry annoyance this time. They carried something colder. Joseph slowed. The air grew heavy. The wind itself seemed to whisper a warning. And in that heartbeat of silence, the moment before everything shattered, Joseph realized too late. Before Joseph could speak, hands seized him. Rough, merciless, the brothers he trusted, brothers who shared his blood, grabbed him with a force that stole the breath from his chest. What are you doing?" Joseph gasped, but no answer came. Only the sound of sandals scraping against stone as they dragged him toward a dried-out cistern hidden beyond a cluster of jagged rocks. His colorful robe, the symbol of Jacob's love, was torn from his body in a swift, violent motion. Dust filled the air as it hit the ground, its vibrant colors now dirt-stained and trampled beneath angry feet. Joseph struggled, shocked more than afraid. These were his brothers. They wouldn't truly harm him, right? But when he looked into their eyes, he saw no hesitation, only years of bitterness boiling over. Reuben hesitated, his voice trembling. "Don't kill him. Throw him into the pit. Let him die on his own." Joseph's heart pounded. The world spun. He shouted their names, reached for their hands, begged for understanding, but they pushed him closer to the edge. The pit yawned beneath him, a dark, hollow mouth carved deep into the earth. He glanced down, nothing but darkness. Then, a shove, a cry, a fall. Joseph hit the bottom with a thud that knocked the air from his lungs. Pain shot through his elbows and back as dust swirled around him. Above, the ring of light grew smaller as his brothers peered down, their silhouettes cold and unrecognizable. His voice echoed weakly against the walls. Why are you doing this?" But they only turned away. Joseph lay in the darkness, his dreams shattered like pottery, and the world suddenly colder than it had ever been. Yet destiny had not abandoned him. Joseph sat curled at the bottom of the pit, knees pulled to his chest, dust clinging to his skin. Hours felt like days. His throat was dry, and every echo from above made his heart hammer with hope, but no one came for him. Then, footsteps, not the hurried, angry steps of his brothers, but the steady, rhythmic clatter of camels and the murmured voices of strangers. Joseph lifted his head. Above the rim of the pit, shadows moved. A caravan crested the hill, Ishmaelite traders, their camels adorned with ropes, jars of spices and bundles of goods that shimmered under the afternoon sun. Their robes were marked with dust from long travel, their voices foreign, their presence unexpected. Joseph couldn't see clearly, but he heard his brothers negotiating. Silver, coins jingling, whispers sharp as knives. Reuben wasn't there. Judah's voice cut through the desert air. What profit is it if we kill him? Let's sell him. He is just our brother, our flesh. The pit swallowed Joseph's gasp. Footsteps drew closer. A rope appeared, tossed down into the darkness. Rough hands grabbed it, pulling him upward. His heart pounded, not with fear now, but confusion. When his eyes met his brother's, there was no warmth, only decisions already made. Joseph tried to speak, but words died on his dry lips. The traders examined him like a piece of merchandise. One lifted Joseph's chin to study his face, another weighed coins in his palm, eyes calculating. And then, with a pouch of silver exchanged and no farewell spoken, Joseph was led away. He looked back one last time, but his brothers had already turned. The desert path stretched long and unforgiving ahead, and Egypt waited at its end. The caravan moved like a serpent across the desert, slow, deliberate, unstoppable. Joseph walked with his hands bound by a rope tied loosely to the saddle of a tall, dark camel. Each step sank into the hot sand, but he kept his head high, refusing to let despair own him. The Ishmaelite traders spoke in a language he barely understood, yet he caught fragments: young, strong, good price, Egypt, Egypt. The word hit him like a blow. He had heard stories of the kingdom of stone and power, of towering monuments, soldiers clad in bronze, and markets filled with people from lands he'd only seen in dreams, but never had he imagined seeing it as a slave. The road was long, nights were cold, days unforgiving. But through it all, Joseph's mind clung to something fragile, something small yet unbreakable, the memory of his dreams. He remembered the stars bowing, he remembered the sheaves of grain. Visions that once filled him with wonder now felt like riddles. Why would God show him glory, only to let him fall so far? One night, as the caravan camped under a sea of stars, Joseph sat apart, staring into the flames. A trader noticed him, his face weathered and stern. "You look like a prince for a boy in chains," the man said. Joseph didn't answer. The trader smirked. "Egypt will decide your worth. Keep your spirit. Broken slaves fetch nothing." Joseph looked back at the fire, embers drifting into the night sky like fragments of lost dreams. But one ember lingered longer than the rest, swirling upward as though carried by something unseen, a whisper that his journey had purpose. The desert ended days later, replaced by fertile lands, palm trees, and stone roads. The caravan curved toward a massive city, rising like a mountain of carved gold. Memphis, the heart of Egypt. Joseph's breath caught. This was a world unlike anything he'd ever known, and somewhere within its towering walls, a man named Potiphar was waiting, a man whose decision would change Joseph's life forever. The city swallowed Joseph whole. Stone towers stretched toward the sky, their shadows swallowing the streets below. Chariots rattled past, merchants shouted from vibrant stalls, and soldiers in bronze armor marched with disciplined steps. Everything moved with purpose, precision, and authority. This was Egypt, a world Joseph had only known through stories told by firelight. Now he stood in its heart as a slave. The traders led him through the bustling streets until they reached a grand courtyard where other slaves were displayed. Joseph was pushed forward. Buyers inspected men like livestock, checking teeth, muscles, obedience. Then came a silence, a ripple of recognition from the crowd. A high-ranking officer approached, his presence commanding immediate respect. His armor gleamed, his robe bore the insignia of Pharaoh's elite guard. Potiphar, captain of the palace guard. He stopped in front of Joseph, studying him with sharp, calculating eyes. "What is your name?" Potiphar asked. "Joseph, son of Jacob," he said softly. Potiphar examined his posture, his clear gaze, the dignity that stubbornly clung to him despite his chains. There was something unusual about this young Hebrew, something unbroken. "I'll take him," Potiphar said, tossing a bag of silver to the traders. Just like that, Joseph's fate changed again. He was taken to Potiphar's estate, massive courtyards, carved pillars, servants hurrying with baskets of grain, and guards patrolling every entrance. Joseph walked through the gates, feeling the weight of new chains, but also a stirring inside him, a whisper he couldn't explain, a sense that he had not been abandoned. As days passed, Joseph worked tirelessly, first in the fields, then tending animals, then managing storerooms. Every task he touched seemed to prosper. Workers noticed, overseers noticed, even Potiphar noticed. Everything this Hebrew does, Potiphar murmured one evening, turns to success. Little by little, Joseph rose from slave to supervisor to master of the entire household. But in the shadows of that rising favor, eyes were watching him, covetous, dangerous, and ready to strike. Joseph's responsibilities grew with each passing week. He now oversaw servants, coordinated trade shipments, managed accounts, and ensured Potiphar's estate ran like a finely tuned chariot. Everyone respected him, everyone except the one person whose gaze never left him, Potiphar's wife. Her eyes followed him through the hallways lined with lotus carvings and painted murals. At first Joseph dismissed the lingering stares, perhaps curiosity, perhaps boredom, but soon curiosity turned into pursuit. She appeared in doorways he passed through. She lingered near the gardens when he worked. She watched him with a hunger he could not ignore. Joseph felt unease coil around his spine. One afternoon, as Joseph checked storage tablets, she stepped closer, too close. Her perfume of myrrh and lotus filled the air. "Joseph," she whispered, her voice like silk sliding over stone, "you're different from the others, strong, handsome. Come, be with me." Joseph stepped back instantly, his breath sharp. "My master trusts me with everything," he said firmly. "How could I betray him? How could I sin against God?" She wasn't used to refusal. Her eyes darkened. Day after day she pressed him, cornering him between pillars, intercepting him in corridors, offering promises, threats, seduction. Joseph avoided her, prayed for strength, worked harder, but temptation stalked him like a lion waiting for a misstep, until one day the house fell strangely silent. No servants, no guards, only stillness and danger. As Joseph entered to complete his duties, a shadow moved behind him. She emerged from the dim light, her expression fixed, determined. This time she didn't speak softly. She grabbed his robe with both hands. "Be with me." Joseph pulled away with all his strength, twisting free, leaving the robe in her fists, and he fled the house without looking back. Her silence cracked, turning into a scream that would cost Joseph everything. Joseph had risen to a position of honor in Potiphar's house. Everything he touched prospered. The servants respected him, the administrators listened to him, and Potiphar trusted him completely. But that same light that shone through Joseph began to awaken something else, the dangerous attention of Potiphar's wife. Joseph avoided unnecessary contact. He knew his duty, and more importantly, he knew his God. Yet Potiphar's wife insisted. Day after day she tried to get close, searching for an excuse, a word, a moment alone. Joseph, firm yet respectful, always replied, "My master trusts me. How could I do such a wicked thing?" The house was unusually quiet, too quiet. Joseph's footsteps echoed through the stone hallways. He did not know that this was the day that would change everything. Suddenly, Potiphar's wife appeared before him, blocking his path. "Stay with me," she whispered, her voice soft, but her eyes filled with a dark determination. Joseph stepped back. He tried to reason with her, but she would not listen. She seized him by his cloak, and Joseph ran. Escape was his only choice. He fled, leaving his cloak behind. That very cloak would become the false evidence that would twist his fate. When Potiphar returned, his wife, burning with rage after being rejected, presented Joseph's cloak as if it were proof of a crime he never committed. Her voice trembled with false fear as her words poured out like poison. "That Hebrew slave tried to take advantage of me." Potiphar froze. He looked at Joseph. He looked at the cloak. He looked at his wife. Joseph did not shout. He simply spoke the truth. But in that house, the truth had no voice. Deep inside, Potiphar doubted her story. He knew Joseph, he knew the man's character, but pressure, shame, and Egyptian honor left no space for doubt. And so, without trial, without defense, without a single chance to speak, Potiphar ordered Joseph to be taken to the prison of Pharaoh. As the guards pushed him into the darkness of the prison, Joseph lifted his eyes toward heaven. There was no rage, no despair, only a silent question, "Lord, why?" And with that question hanging in the air, the iron door slammed shut behind him, opening the next chapter of his epic journey. Darkness swallowed Joseph as the heavy iron door slammed behind him. The walls were cold, damp, and unforgiving. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and despair. Chains clinked, rats scuttled, and distant echoes of prisoners' murmurs reminded him that he was not alone. Yet despite the shadows, Joseph's spirit did not waver. Days turned into nights, and nights blurred into days. Joseph worked tirelessly, helping the guards, organizing the prisoners, and keeping his dignity intact. Even in chains, his character shone brighter than the gloom around him. The other prisoners began to notice. Some whispered encouragement, others sought his guidance. One day, two prominent prisoners, a cupbearer and a baker of Pharaoh, were thrown into the same cell. Both were troubled, haunted by dreams that kept them awake through the cold Egyptian nights. Joseph listened patiently, asking for the details, and then spoke with clarity, insight, and courage. "I can interpret dreams," he said gently, "but it is God who gives the meaning." The cupbearer's eyes widened. The baker's face tightened with tension. Joseph explained the visions, revealing what would happen to each man with startling accuracy. One would be restored to Pharaoh's court, the other condemned. Days later, as Joseph predicted, the cupbearer was released and restored to his position, while the baker met his grim fate. The cupbearer promised Joseph he would not forget him, but as he returned to Pharaoh's service, the years passed, and Joseph remained in prison, still unjustly confined, still faithful, still hopeful. In the shadows of that dungeon, Joseph learned patience, endurance, and faith, stronger than chains. He began to understand that this dark place was not the end, but a stepping stone toward the destiny God had prepared for him. And far beyond the prison walls, Pharaoh himself began to experience dreams that troubled the kingdom, dreams that no wise man in Egypt could interpret. A chain of events was about to unfold that would finally draw Joseph from the shadows into the light. The rumors of Pharaoh's troubling dreams spread like wildfire throughout Egypt. No wise man, priest, or magician could decipher their meaning. Anxiety rippled through the palace corridors, and Pharaoh himself grew restless, pacing the golden halls, staring at walls adorned with hieroglyphs and paintings of gods. Meanwhile, in the darkness of the dungeon, Joseph continued his daily routines. He organized the prisoners, tended to the sick, and kept his faith alive. Yet the whisper of destiny stirred within him. Every step in chains, every day in the shadows, had prepared him for what was coming. One morning, the prison guards brought a summons. Joseph's heart stirred. Pharaoh wished to see someone who could interpret his dreams. The cupbearer, finally restored to his position, had remembered Joseph's gift and pleaded on his behalf. Joseph was led out of the dungeon, his chains removed, and escorted through the grand corridors of the palace. Sunlight streamed through towering windows, casting golden beams on intricate stone carvings. Guards and courtiers stared at the young Hebrew, his presence calm yet commanding, even in unfamiliar surroundings. He was brought before Pharaoh, seated on his magnificent throne, adorned with gold and jewels, the weight of the kingdom pressing down on him. Pharaoh's eyes were filled with a mixture of hope and desperation. "My dreams, I cannot understand them," Pharaoh said, his voice echoing in the vast hall. "I have summoned all the wise men of Egypt, and none can tell me their meaning." Joseph bowed respectfully. "It is not in me, but God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace," he said. Pharaoh leaned forward, tension visible in every line of his face. Joseph's calm eyes met his, a quiet confidence radiating from a man who had endured betrayal, slavery, and prison, yet remained unbroken. This was the moment Joseph's life had been building toward, the moment where shadows and chains would give way to light and destiny. Joseph took a deep breath, feeling the weight of destiny pressing on his shoulders. Pharaoh's eyes bore into him, wide with anticipation and desperation. The young Hebrew spoke with calm authority. "The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to you what he is about to do. There will be 7 years of great abundance throughout the land of Egypt, followed by 7 years of severe famine. The abundance will be so plentiful that no harvest shall be lacking, but the famine will consume everything unless a plan is made. The room fell silent. Pharaoh's advisors murmured nervously, realizing the gravity of Joseph's interpretation. Joseph continued, his voice steady, unwavering. Therefore, let Pharaoh appoint a discerning and wise man over the land of Egypt to store up grain during the years of abundance. Let him gather all the food of those good years and keep it under Pharaoh's authority to prepare for the coming years of famine, so that the land may survive. Pharaoh leaned forward, struck by Joseph's wisdom. Here was a man who not only understood the dreams, but also foresaw their practical solution. He could save the kingdom from devastation. Without hesitation, Pharaoh declared, "Can we find such a man as this, one filled with the Spirit of God, to govern my entire land?" The courtiers looked at one another in awe, some in disbelief. Pharaoh's gaze returned to Joseph, filled with recognition, admiration, and a spark of hope. Joseph's destiny, forged in betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment, was about to take its first step toward glory. The chains of his past were gone, replaced by the golden mantle of authority. Pharaoh rose from his golden throne, the weight of his kingdom pressing down upon him. He turned to Joseph, his voice resolute, "You shall be over all my house, and all my people shall submit to your command. Only in the throne will I be greater than you." Joseph bowed, humbled by the responsibility. Guards and courtiers watched in astonishment as Pharaoh placed the signet ring of authority on Joseph's hand, a symbol that would grant him power over all Egypt. From that moment, Joseph moved through the palace with new authority. The grain silos, once unorganized and neglected, now became centers of meticulous planning. Workers and overseers followed his instructions precisely, trusting in the wisdom that had brought him here. During the 7 years of abundance, Egypt prospered beyond imagination. The fields overflowed, the rivers ran full, and the storehouses were filled to the brim. Joseph ensured that every granary and cellar was stocked, every district accounted for. Pharaoh's advisors began to speak Joseph's name with respect and even envy, for the young Hebrew had become the most powerful man in the kingdom after Pharaoh himself. Yet Joseph did not allow pride to take root. He remained humble, remembering the chains of his past, the betrayal, and the prison. His faith in God guided every decision. In quiet moments, he walked among the people, observing, listening, and teaching. The young Hebrew who had been sold into slavery was now the governor of Egypt, the protector of a nation, and the savior in the years to come. But beyond the borders of Egypt, the winds of famine began to stir. Neighboring lands would soon face the harsh reality that Egypt alone was prepared. And Joseph, with wisdom, faith, and foresight, would become the key to survival for many, including those he had once called family. The 7 years of abundance came to an end, and the winds of famine swept across Egypt and neighboring lands. Fields withered, rivers dried in distant territories, and the people cried out in desperation. In Egypt, Joseph's foresight was clear. The granaries were full, the storehouses brimming with grain, and the people fed with measured care. The nation was prepared, unlike the surrounding lands where hunger grew fierce. One day a group of travelers approached the palace. Their clothes were worn, faces sunburned and weary. They bowed before Pharaoh's officials and explained they were sent from Canaan, seeking food for their families. Joseph observed them carefully. Something stirred in his heart, a faint recognition behind the veil of time. He examined their faces, listened to their accents, and watched their mannerisms. These men, though strangers to him in appearance, carried the weight of the past. After questioning them about their homeland, Joseph's intuition sharpened. These were his brothers, the very men who had betrayed him, sold him into slavery, and left him to suffer. Yet the boy he had once been, the hurt he had felt, was tempered by the man he had become. He did not reveal his identity immediately. Instead, Joseph spoke wisely and cautiously, testing them with questions and tasks, measuring their hearts. The stage was set for a reunion that would confront the sins of the past and the mercy of God. The brothers, unaware of the man before them, were guided to Joseph's storehouses to collect grain. And in the shadow of the vast silos, the threads of destiny began to weave together, betrayal, repentance, and reconciliation poised to change lives forever. Days passed as Joseph tested his brothers, watching their behavior, observing their interactions, and seeing whether their hearts had changed. He could see guilt, humility, and even kindness emerging where once there had been deceit and betrayal. Finally, Joseph could no longer contain himself. He commanded the servants to clear the room, leaving him alone with his brothers. His voice, calm but powerful, broke the silence. "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" Shock froze the brothers in place. Faces turned pale, eyes widened, and words failed them. The brothers who had once plotted against him could not comprehend that the young boy they had sold into slavery was now the ruler before them. Tears welled in Joseph's eyes, but he swallowed bitterness and allowed mercy to guide his heart. "Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves," he said. "God sent me here before you to preserve life. It was not you who sent me, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, master of all Egypt, and a savior for many, including your families." The brothers fell to their knees, weeping, ashamed and awed at the man Joseph had become. In that moment, past wounds began to heal, and forgiveness took root. Joseph embraced them, not as the boy who had been betrayed, but as the man chosen by God to turn tragedy into salvation. The stage was now set for the reunion with his father, Jacob, and the migration of the family to Egypt. What had begun as betrayal and suffering had transformed into restoration, provision, and divine purpose. Word of Joseph's revelation spread quickly. Jacob, the aged father who had mourned his son for years, could scarcely believe the news. With trembling hands and a heart full of hope, he set out for Egypt, guided by the emissaries who had seen the truth with their own eyes. When Jacob and Joseph finally met, time seemed to stand still. The father, who had wept for the boy lost to slavery, now embraced the man who had become a savior. Tears flowed freely, mingled with laughter and whispered prayers of thanksgiving. Joseph introduced his brothers to their father, and the family, once fractured by envy and betrayal, was restored. Egypt, under Joseph's wise governance, had been prepared for the famine, and now the family could safely gather and live under his protection. Joseph looked out across the granaries filled with grain, the Nile flowing steadily, and the people fed. Every hardship, every betrayal, and every dark moment had been part of a larger plan. What had begun as suffering had transformed into salvation, not just for his family, but for an entire nation. With his family reunited and Egypt thriving, Joseph knelt in quiet prayer, acknowledging the hand of God in every twist of his journey. From slavery to power, from betrayal to forgiveness, from suffering to salvation, the story of Joseph was complete, a testament to faith, perseverance, and divine purpose. The boy who had been sold into slavery had become a man who saved a nation, and through it all, God's plan had been fulfilled.